Today, we welcome the amazing communication expert, Tedx speaker, and vocal coach, Kim A. Page, who I have had the luck to speak to twice recently for the UK's leading coach and mentor accreditation instance, the IPCNM. I hosted her brilliant masterclass on Your Voice, Your Power, and interviewed her on her book, The Right Kind of Loud. Love the title. I loved her message. I loved her style. I loved how she is as a woman. I loved her energy. And I really wanted to bring her to you too through my podcast and now my YouTube channel. And here we are. So Kim, thank you for being willing to talk to me yet again. And before we get into the topic, can I ask you to say a little bit yourself about who you are and maybe why you do what you do?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be in your lovely moderating, interviewing hands again, Julie. Thank you so much for bringing me on. From the first moment when I was in your, engagement, I just realized this woman brings sparks and aliveness and lifts the level of whatever is happening. So very thrilled, and also very thrilled to be in your podcast series. I mean, Fabulous After 50, what a glorious place to gather wisdom, aliveness, and power and curiosities. So I'm very thrilled to be joining into your series. And hello to all the listeners and the viewers. And thank you also for your lovely introduction. Yes, I am the one that is called on when somebody has a message they want to deliver. And for some reason, it could be good with some support. So often I work with, for example, somebody who's a gentleman I worked with recently. He was at the top director level and I was doing interviews to get to the C-suite. And he'd done it a series of times, but he kept stopping. And so what was it about those interviews? And so then I worked with him, and I haven't heard the results. I think he got the job.
Right. But I'm sure you'll have boosted his confidence and all that anyway.
Yes, not only confidence, also how he spoke, etc., etc. But anyway, so that's what I do. Sometimes it's helping people with presentations, and sometimes it's the voice itself, which is the topic for today.
Right. And I thought that's wonderful, because of course we do talk, and my motto is you deserve to be heard. So we're talking about expressing ourselves, but we haven't talked at all in my series about the voice itself as an instrument. So first of all, I thank you for your compliments, because it is always slightly daunting for me, when I know that the person's a communication expert and a voice expert, and I think, oh my gosh, too loud, too fast, slow down. So thank you for that. But first of all, tell us a little bit about you as a woman. I always love the global setting. So what nationality are you? Where are you based? Just a little bit about you, Kim.
Me, Kim. So I started my journey in Oslo, Norway. My mother is Norwegian. My father came from England to Norway in his 20s, and he never returned to England. And he was he was a musician. So he played at the opera in Oslo. And then he got a job at the symphony orchestra in Gothenburg. So I grew up between Oslo and Gothenburg, so between Norway and Sweden. So when we're talking about the voice, of course, I had refined hearing, I would say, from very early.
Yes.
My father, I don't know, somehow I knew how to isolate or to identify the sound of a French horn. So there's a story, a childhood story of me. And of course, when I heard a French horn, I thought all the French horns in the world were my father playing, of course, because he was playing the French horn constantly. So there's a story of me walking up the stairs and going, shh, fine. Like, because not everybody has to listen. So I've been practicing, I think, listening since early on.
Right. I didn't know that about you, see?
Yes. Yes. And then when it comes to the voice, of course, I started singing in a girls' choir. I must have been like 10 or so. And then I sang in girls' choir my whole schooling. And then in the high school, I sang in a church choir. I didn't think of it as anything particular, because coming from a musician's family, it was completely normal. But of course, if you look at the voice, I mean, I was lucky. I had really good choir conductors. So of course, I actually practiced my voice since very young,
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, you've then developed this hearing. And I remember also in your masterclass, you were saying, the whole differences in the languages, because you've moved also extensively, right? I mean, I know you're now based in London. I know that before this you were in Dubai. So, I mean, you've had the occasion to tune your ear as well to totally different languages and sonorities as well, which must be very fascinating when you pick up on so much more than most of us do.
Well, I think it's accessible for all of us. I'm just used to fine-tuning extra, I think. My father had this, it's called something, I don't know what it's called in English, absolute gehör. He could hear like a car honk and he can say which tone it was. It was a B
Oh
or
my
a
goodness.
C. So I'm not that, but
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 how
I hear a
fascinating
lot.
that you've then made your profession out of it and that this was actually something that you grew up with, a
Yes,
sensitivity to sounds.
yes,
So, okay, so the topic for today is your
yes,
voice, your power. And of course, we're
yes.
talking about being heard. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
50
Mm,
plus
mm,
audience. We're
mm.
talking in a way as well, maybe about women being heard,
Yes.
claiming your space,
Mm.
owning whatever you're saying. So, when you say your voice, your power, so does that mean that that's something because all our voices are unique, right? Aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We all have a unique voice. So how do you use that idea of your voice, your power? What does that mean to you?
Well, I had the fortune of practicing my voice as young, so I had confidence around that.
Yes.
Yes, and then I had my own voice journey, and I will be forever grateful to a beautiful guitarist from Stockholm. So I moved to the first country when I left Sweden. The first big country out in the world was Berlin. So I moved from Stockholm to Berlin
Ah,
when I was the day after I turned 23, and it's one
another
of
thing we
those.
have in common. I lived in Berlin too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, there you go. Einmal Berlin.
Natürlich, yeah.
Natürlich. Yeah, there you go. So, and I thought I was going to stay 2 months, but it turned into 2 years. It's one of those kind of stories. And I met this guitarist, and he had heard me sing, and he kept saying, Kim, you need to sing. Kim, you need to sing. He was, which I thought was very flattering, but,
Yeah.
and then, and he turned into my guitarist. We formed a duo together.
Wow.
And he had a rock band. So our first concert was in the backyard and Hinterhof, typical
Mm-hmm.
Berlin backyard. And we were kind of the
Oh.
pre-band for his rock concert. And I was so nervous, I thought I was going to faint. But there were some children, so I kind of sang to the children a little bit. And the funny thing is, I sang in Swedish. So we started
Oh.
singing. I sang Swedish folk songs, and there's some Swedish singers that I would do covers of. And then after a while, I took out from the drawers, I took, my poems that I'd been gathering for
Oh.
years and years. And then we started doing music to the poems, and then we started doing songs ourselves. So there was a journey there. But one would think, like, who would be interested in Swedish sing-songwriters in Berlin? But we had a little following. It
Yeah.
actually went really
Yeah.
well. And then, of course, because I was so nervous, I started taking singing lessons because, suddenly you're
Yeah.
there with an audience. And and I had a fantastic singing pedagogue I'm thinking in German now, singing teacher, Annette Möller. She was from the ex-East, and she lived in
Right.
Potsdam. So I would go to Potsdam. So I had her. And then after having done that a few years, I took this workshop with Binka Dobreva. She's a Bulgarian singer. Have you heard about the Bulgarian singing?
No.
Okay, so the Bulgarian singers, the women, they have a very, very unique vocal tradition. It's completely metallic. It's controlled from here.
Gosh.
And like the whole tonality and the musical universe is completely different. It's very special. And I had
Okay.
heard that kind of music, but I never met anyone. So I went on this workshop with this, and I was blown away. So then I started studying Bulgarian singing, and I sang in 3 different Bulgarian choirs, and I was into that. And then I met this beautiful woman, very powerful from
Mm-hmm.
the Czech Republic. And she developed a voice methodology around expressing your feelings into your voice and get
Right.
your raw emotion right into the voice and making that merge. So I went to the Czech Republic to study with her, So I had this, I
You
call
have
it
this
the whole
wide.
journey. And
Yeah.
then I heard about overtone chanting. Do you know about overtone chanting?
No. Well, I do because I read your biography. It was what was
Ah,
it? The monks, wasn't it? It's two
yes.
tones
Well,
or
the way
something, right?
most people have heard about it is the Tibetan monks. It's the way, where they sit and chant. It's a very embodied humming kind of sound. Or if you take an instrument like the didgeridoo, the Australian didgeridoo, it has. So it's a way to use the voice. So you split it up in two voices at the same time so you can hear the overtones. It sounds very
Goodness.
weird, but I can do it and everybody can.
But I mean, basically what it means is there is so much that we can do, because of course I can imagine that the audience listening there, they might not be into singing. We're not sort of talking about, you know, those who really do own their voice like you do. We're talking about what we can do with our voice.
Yes,
and I think
exactly.
Women in particular are nervous about our voices. I know when we need to do, you know, public speakings, women are always terrified that their voice is going to, you know, zoom up in that super nervous, very high-pitched tone, or that you're not going to be able to know how to speak. I mean, I know so many people when they're doing their presentations, they say to me, well, what if I freeze? You know, what if there's not a word coming out? I think that's one of the common phobia. So you're saying your voice, your power, for you, this is really all of who you are and everything that you want to express, whether it's a song or whether it's even just saying your opinion on something.
Yes, I have three things I wanted to say now, because you're mirroring so beautifully. So let me see. One of the voice gurus of our time, her name is Meredith Monk. She's fantastic. She's in New York. She's developed a whole special tradition of singing. This Meredith Monk schooling of how to sing. Wow. Like she has a very special, she does operas, but in non-vibrato sound. So not the ha, but the ha. Yeah, anyway.
Okay.
And she's fantastic. And one of her quotes is, she says, a whole human life can be contained in the voice. And I love that. And
that is so true.
So for me, when I work with the voices, I was just sharing a little bit how I discovered, as you could hear, all these different things that the voice could do. It's so much bigger and more elastic and more anything. What's important for me when I work with somebody's voice is not to make a specific sound, but it's about accessing that home. So I feel like the voice is actually our home. Like we can be inside it. It can carry us. It can hold everything. It can express everything. So when I've had a lot of extremes in my life, and because I have the baseline I have in my voice, for me, it's like home, you know, like I can be inside of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And
you're allowed to be inside of it, because I think you're lucky in a way that voice has been something that you've been allowed and encouraged to express your whole life. When you think of you know, lots of women of more or less my age, we're just coming out of that generation, but it's still a generation where little girls are quiet and they don't let themselves be heard.
Exactly.
You know, you're not supposed to make noise. You're not supposed to start, you know, bursting into opera singing in the middle of dinner or whatsoever. We're very much told to keep it quiet, to not speak too much. We're told we speak too much, too fast. You know, it's still, even nowadays, women have to really control themselves before a meeting, because I think the emotions maybe come in our voice more than they do for men. I don't know if that's true or not, but it always feels that sometimes we struggle to control that part which comes up through our voice. But there are things we can do, and that's what I'm hearing you say here, is that it's an incredibly elastic tool. If you talk about all these hundreds of courses, you know, and I mean, it just seems mind-blowing to me, all these things that you can do with your voice, whereas we do nothing with our voice. Well, how can we make that better?
Yeah, how can we make that better? So the reason, well, first of all, the statistics are very sad. I think this is my voice coach colleague, Tanya de Jong in Australia. And she says in her TED talk that 85% of all adults have been asked to be silent.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
That's a huge amount. And because I'm a choir leader, and I've had different choirs for different periods. And then, you know, if I have a choir, I will meet someone. It's like, hey, why don't you come and join it? Try that rehearsal, see if it's fun. Most people will say no. And most people will say no with quite an intense emotion. Yes. And the most extreme case is when people will say, no, I don't have a voice.
Yes.
I find that very extreme, right? You're saying to me with your voice that you don't have a voice.
Yeah.
Like if I would ask you to come tango dancing, you wouldn't say, I don't have a body. You would say, I haven't learned that technique. But when you listen to it about the voice, the judgment about the voice is so intense that we actually say, I don't have a voice. I mean, that's intense. And the reason we have this judgment is because going back to all the different techniques I've been studying in my 20s, all those different techniques made the voice sound completely different. And so everywhere on the planet, there is a vocal tradition, right? So if you're now a gypsy in the Czech Republic, it's going to sound one way. If you're born in Mongolia, throat singing or overtone chanting is the way you sing. If you're born in India and you're a woman, it's going to be very high-pitched singing, like in the Bollywood songs.
Yes.
So And so when we are born and we start using our voice, initially all children love expressing themselves
Yes.
and singing. Like it's a natural born right, to play
Yes.
around it. And if we didn't have that playfulness around sounds, we wouldn't learn how to speak. Because that's where
Yeah.
how we learn how to speak. We listen for a sound and we copy out, and it's
Yeah.
a playfulness and it's a space where you can make mistakes so you can have fun with it. And then the conditioning starts, or the culturing of us.
Yes.
And then if for some reason we are singing something that doesn't match the exact vocal tradition of that exact place,
You're off
usually,
tune, or you're exactly you're tone
Oh,
deaf,
yeah, they
or
will laugh. They will ask you to be just mime. They will say you're too loud. And the thing is that people don't mean to be mean, but there's a very sort of heightened sensitivity around, like when we start expressing sounds and singing, it needs to sound exactly like that tradition, right? And as I've expressed, the voice can do so much more. And so that's one of the reasons when I've had choirs, I always sing songs from all around the world. And it's much easier for me to welcome someone into singing when we do something they've never heard before. If you and I would start singing and we would sing an Elton John song, we will hear the original in our head, and we would hear how it's supposed to sound. And so it's much easier if I would take you and make you sing an Arabic song you never heard. And so
true.
When we are not accessing our own voice, that very often translates into our ability to own the room, to express our needs, to draw boundaries. Like the unfortunate thing around this judgment, if we don't feel like our voice is home, as I say, it gets more difficult for us to manifest and to show up with others, because the voice is the bridge between me and the world, right? It's the bridge. I have my desires, I have my thoughts, and then the voice is the messenger. And it's such an intimate messenger. I think I talked about that in the session we had. How it starts inside my body, and then it goes through my throat, depending on what technical things I'm doing. And then it becomes these not famous, but the sound waves that we've all seen. Then it enters my listeners' ear canals, and through those ear canals, it goes on inside the body of the other person, and it becomes vibrations. The voice is actually a physical experience. It's not sound, it is vibration. And if you think about that, that's from the inside of one person to the inside of another. And that
very intimate, right? Yeah.
It's more intimate than skin to skin.
Yeah.
And, and I read a book a few years ago about a woman who was deaf, and she would do different things. And then comes this section when she goes to the disco to dance. And I thought, this is weird. And she would place herself in front of the loudspeakers to feel the vibrations.
And that's how she knew.
Wow, of course, right? It just brought it home to me on a different level. And so the point of working with the voice is not to make it sound beautiful or sound a certain way. It's about access. And I always say that, when I do voice coaching, when I help people find their voice, it's not like we're going on a hunt and go out to look for your voice. Your voice is there.
Yeah.
Your voice is, if you haven't got full access to it, it's just waiting.
Yeah.
Very often what's stopping us from accessing is a lot of judgment, and then just a situation where it's fun and safe to experience, and where you get some tools. And it's
actually, that's what you do with your clients, right? I mean, what do they come to you for? I mean, they don't all come because they want to be a singer or whatsoever. So that man you were talking about was, it's a mixture of the vocal tool and the psychological, I'm allowed to express myself and all the rest.
Well, I mean, I work as a communication trainer or coach. So people come to me for a variety of things. Some of them come with the voice as a focus point, and some of them come and then we bring up the voice as part of it. For example, I had a beautiful woman in my hand yesterday. She's a tech ninja in Silicon Valley. Fantastic, super, super, super smart. And she has the disadvantages of operating in Silicon Valley, and she's non-white, and she's got an accent, and she's a woman. So in the power structure, the three steps things that goes down, right? And she's aware of herself, and she can feel it. Like, when she gets nervous, the voice starts to tremble,
Yes.
just like you were describing. And also, like when she gets nervous, she notices that it's hard to keep like a stable voice. Like it starts to, and this again, it's nothing wrong, it's normal. So next time we're going to work
Right.
on her voice, right?
So you actually
And
do
so,
literally vocal exercises and
so
stuff like
yeah,
that.
and sometimes, for example, I'm just thinking of different examples. I had a gentleman, very successful entrepreneur in Dubai last year, and he was aware of that he didn't really come through that well when he was speaking, especially then if you do it online. If you don't have a good voice, if you then go online, because when we go online, we go from 5 to 2 senses. And the only two senses we have is audio and video. So if then audio isn't really working well, it's really unfortunate. And this gentleman, when we started working, I was like, I saw that he had this inhibition, like he wasn't really moving a lot. Like you can see, like he was very stiff. So for many of us, we have a lot of tensions here in the jaw, right? Yeah. Some of us have headaches, some have migraines, some have back pain. We do different things. So in his case, there was so much tension, and he had the first time I encountered, he had a lot of tensions up here, muscles.
Oh yeah.
Right. So there was so much tension, so he could hardly move. Yeah. And then if you have a strong accent on top of not being able to move your muscles, whoa.
Yeah.
So what I did with him, we started simply massaging and activating the muscles.
Right.
And in short, it doesn't matter what language you speak, but the whole area here with muscles, the looser and more elastic that is, the better you're going to speak, because the overtones, which is kind of, the overtones is the quality that makes your voice sound nice. If you don't have any overtones, it's flat. And the overtones are created inside our mouth. And so, for example, right now, if I do like this and I just close my mouth and you can't really, like, but when I do this, you can hear.
Yeah, so, and of course it sounds alive.
Yes.
Right.
So if you have jaw tension, or if you're not opening your mouth properly, or if you have tension around your lips, or you're not articulating, those things actually, although they're outer things, they impact the sound itself.
Right.
And to comfort any listeners who thinks this sounds very technical and weird, I can say to you that when I have voice coaching, it's usually 2 sessions, 1 or 2 sessions. It's not like it's a long, because it's usually, I need to identify what the inhibition, what the undiscovered part is. And then I have a video with some exercises I can send. And then sometimes what I do is I listen, because I know a lot of strange exercises. And then we'd practice them. And then I can hear like, oh, for you, that's the exercise you need. And then we do a little practice recording for 3-4 minutes.
And it's also about consciousness and awareness, isn't it? Because I mean, lots of us don't even give much thought to our voice, or if we do, it's, as you say, more under the thing of, oh, I know I've got to speak less loud, because I tend to speak very loud. I get very enthusiastic and I speak extremely fast. I speak 5 languages, but I tend to, even in those which are not grammatically correct, I've got so much I want to say, la la la. So I've we learn to express it, to tone it down or whatsoever. But it's also that awareness of the voice as your power, and all those things that you said about, the bridge to others. Now, I heard you say it's about accessing our own voice. So as usual on my episode, I always ask for 3 tips for those, who are not perhaps yet at the level of wanting to take it serious, that step further, and actually, come to you. Or we will talk about your book just as we finish off, because I think that's also an incredibly good tool for people to have. But if we just say, okay, 3 tips that listeners can, literally apply immediately. And we have about, 5 minutes in total left.
Perfect. Thank you. The first thing that I recommend always is actually around that same judgment that I talked about, right? So the way I see it, it's almost like our voice has its own soul. Our voice is its own being. And how would you feel if you're inside someone and just being judged the whole time? It's not nice.
What a beautiful image.
No, the poor little voice. So just, to become aware, I had a young woman in as a client a few years ago. She was taking her MBA or business masters, and she was doing more and more public speaking, and she was aware of that, to get to the next level with this a piece with my voice. So I asked her, I always also start asking, like, what is your relationship to your voice? And she said, when I grew up, little girls were not supposed to be heard.
Right.
So it was that simple. So she didn't have a technical inhibition, if you will, but she had that,
Yeah.
So I asked her, and this is, if the listeners, if you like this, I'm giving this exercise to you. So I thought, what do I do for this young woman? So I said, I want you to do a little ritual. I want you to imagine a place. It can be a bench somewhere. It can be a cafe. It can be on the beach. It can be wherever. And you're going to go and have a little date with your voice. And you just bring your journal and kind of prepare yourself and just go there and greet your voice and see kind of what comes up for you and see how that is. And then, and then see what happens. And she took the instructions. And of course, when she came back, I was so curious to hear what had happened. And she said, I went to the place I had imagined. I sat there, I had my journal, whatever. And I can't really tell you if anything happened, but I went straight home and I picked up the phone and I called up somebody I needed to talk to and I spoke my whole truth.
Right.
And that for me was the goosebump, right? So, and that is also an image of what happens when we gain our voice, because it's a physical tool, it's a metaphor, and it's also an action tool. It's all these different levels.
Yeah.
The first thing is find your way to be gentle with your voice and to befriend it and not to judge.
Befriend your voice. Okay.
Be curious. And then the second thing is just as an instrument, the voice is, I'm thinking you've had lots of practice. You speak 5 different languages. That means you've created 5 different.
Why do you think I've got so many wrinkles?
Oh, bless. Bless. It's good. It's actually really good to move all the muscles. So I'm thinking, for those also, you want to just keep the elasticity and all this whole articulation in motion. If you have songs in other languages that you hear, sing along or try to pronounce them. And overall, just when you sit in the car, sing along.
Yeah, sing along. That's
a
good one.
In the shower, in the car, wherever, It's a little bit like a muscle if it doesn't get used.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm also a language girl, So, part of me, the thrill of when I've been learning a new language is this to say the sounds.
Yeah.
And a little mini way you can practice that, which comes for free. Every time you meet people who have a name that's outside your normal name, ask them, am I pronouncing this correctly?
Yeah.
Take that extra moment and lean in. And so there's 2 things that's happening there. You are, for your own sake, practicing some muscles and sending new signals to your brain because you're doing some sounds that normally you have to listen in a different way.
Right.
And for that person, you're showing them that they matter, and you're stepping outside of the white privilege bubble, which is that everything's English speaking is right and all the others are weird, which is not true. Of course, it's a privilege card thing. So that's actually another little thing you can do. And then, of course, if there are any singing groups around where you are, try to sing with others. Yeah. It's so joyous. It's so much fun.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so simple, but we don't think of it and we don't work on it. And now is, this fabulous after 50, now is the time to express ourselves. And I love the idea of befriending our voice, that little soul inside of us, right? Just extremely rapidly, because we are over time already. But I do know about your book because I interviewed you on it. It's a fantastic book. Explain very shortly. So it's called The Right Kind of Loud. It was in, 6 parts?
Yes. The Right Kind of Loud, Finding Your Communication Voice. You can find it on my website, which is rightkindofloud.com. I'm going to say it one more time, just rightkindofloud.com. And the cool thing is, if you go to my book on my website, you can download the first chapter for free. And guess what that chapter is about? It's the chapter about my voice journey.
Right.
And about the voice in itself and about
and it's very broad. I mean, I know it covers lots of different parts, right? The 6 parts are really, it's very comprehensive about express and the voice. So thank you very much, Kim.
Thank you.
I hope to have you back at some other point. And for the rest of you out there, I hope you are going to make friends with that little voice, which has maybe been, pushed down for 50+ years, and sing in the shower and move your mouth around like me. And we don't care about wrinkles anymore. It's all about shining and being heard. So loads of love to you all. Speak to you again at the same time next week.